The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, somewhere over the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan. What came through that frequency would later be dissected in classified briefings from Langley to the Pentagon, analyzed by military historians, and whispered about in veteran bars from San Diego to Norfolk. But in that moment, as Navy SEAL Team 6 found themselves pinned down in a valley that wasn't supposed to exist on any map, all they heard was silence. Lieutenant Commander Zara Ghost Okafor had been monitoring the emergency frequency from her ready room aboard the USS Wasp when the transmission cut through the night like a knife. The voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Marcus Bulldog Rodriguez, a man she'd never met but whose reputation preceded him through every special operations community from here to Coronado. His words were measured, professional, but underneath lay something she'd heard too many times before, the controlled desperation of warriors who'd walked into a trap. Any station, this is Neptune 6. We are danger close, taking effective fire from multiple positions. Request immediate close air support. Grid 41 RPQ 874-632. How copy? The operations center fell silent. Ghost watched as the night shift controllers exchanged glances, their faces illuminated by the green glow of radar screens. She knew what they were thinking, the same thing everyone thought when her call sign appeared on the duty roster. The Marine Corps had given her the Harrier because someone in Washington thought it would look good in the recruitment videos. A female pilot in a vertical takeoff fighter jet, hovering like some mechanical angel over the battlefield. Great for public relations, less great, according to her squadron mates, for actual combat. The radio squawked again, Rodriguez's voice tighter now. Neptune 6 to any station, we are taking casualties. Repeat, we have casualties and are requesting immediate air support. Ghost was already moving, her flight suit half-zipped as she jogged toward the flight deck. The night air hit her face like a slap, salt spray mixing with jet fuel fumes as she approached her aircraft. The AV-8B Harrier II sat bathed in red light, its angular frame looking predatory even at rest. Ground Crew Chief Sergeant Tommy Nakamura was already running pre-flight checks, his practiced hands dancing over control surfaces and weapons pylons. "Ma'am, you sure about this?" Nakamura asked, not looking up from his checklist. Weather showing 18-foot swells, visibility down to 2 miles in the mountains. Ghost strapped on her helmet, the familiar weight settling against her skull like an old friend. Through the tinted visor, she could see the doubt in his eyes, the same doubt she'd been seeing for 3 years, ever since she'd graduated from flight school second in her class and been assigned to VMA 542, the Flying Tigers. She'd earned her call sign during training at Yuma, not for any spectacular display of flying prowess, but for the way she seemed to appear and disappear during exercises, slipping through enemy radar like smoke. Her instructors had meant it as a compliment, but her squadron mates had turned it into something else, Ghost, the pilot who wasn't really there when it mattered. Tonight, she thought as the Harrier's engine wound up to a banshee scream, that was about to change. The catapult shot felt like being punched in the spine by God himself. One moment Ghost was sitting stationary on the Wasp's flight deck. The next she was hurtling through salt-thick darkness at 180 knots, the Harrier's Pegasus engine drinking fuel like a drowning man drinks air. Below, the Arabian Sea stretched endlessly black, punctuated only by the occasional whitecap caught in the aircraft carrier's wake. She banked northeast toward the Afghan coast, climbing through scattered clouds that turned her windscreen into a kaleidoscope of moisture and reflected light. The Harrier responded to her touch like a living thing, its unique thrust-vectoring nozzles giving her capabilities that conventional fighters could only dream of. She could hover like a helicopter, accelerate like a rocket, and deliver ordnance with surgical precision. In theory. "Control, this is Ghost requesting updated coordinates on Neptune 6. She transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Ghost Control, be advised, mission parameters have changed. You are not, repeat not, authorized to engage. Your orders are to provide reconnaissance only and relay targeting data to available Air Force assets. She felt her jaw clench. Through her heads-up display, she could see the digital readout showing her distance to the target area, 127 nautical miles and closing. Somewhere down there, Rodriguez and his team were bleeding into Afghan soil while bureaucrats played safe from climate-controlled bunkers. Control, Ghost copies reconnaissance only. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The Harrier 8 miles with mechanical hunger, its afterburner painting brief stars against the night sky. Ghost leveled off at 15,000 feet, well above small arms range but low enough to provide accurate close air support if when the rules of engagement inevitably changed. She'd studied the terrain maps during her brief, memorizing every ridge and valley in the target area. The Hindu Kush was unforgiving country, all jagged peaks and hidden ravines where armies had died for centuries. Her radio headset crackled with cross-chatter from various units scattered across the Afghan theater. A convoy taking sniper fire near Bagram. An outpost requesting a medical evacuation in Helmand province. The usual symphony of controlled chaos that defined modern warfare. But underneath it all, she could hear something else. The faint hiss of an open channel where someone was breathing hard, trying to stay quiet. Neptune 6, Ghost, I'm 15 minutes out from your position. Sit tight. Ghost, Neptune 6. Rodriguez's voice came back tight with strain. Roger that. Be advised, we've got company coming from 3 sides. Estimate platoon strength element with at least 2 machine gun positions. Ghost checked her ordnance display. 4 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders for air-to-air defense, and 300 rounds of 25 cannon ammunition. Enough firepower to level a city block, useless if she wasn't cleared to employ it. She pushed the Harrier harder, feeling G-forces press her into the ejection seat as she climbed through a cloud bank that turned the world into gray cotton. The mission clock on her instrument panel showed 4:21 hours. Dawn was still 3 hours away, but in these mountains, darkness could be either salvation or death sentence. She thought about Rodriguez and his team, wondering if they had families waiting back home, kids who would ask why Daddy wasn't coming back from his deployment. The Hindu Kush rose ahead like the spine of some prehistoric beast, peaks jutting into the star-filled sky like broken teeth. Somewhere in those valleys, good men were about to die unless she could find a way to bend the rules without breaking them entirely. Ghost adjusted her night vision goggles and began her descent toward hell. The target area materialized through Ghost's night vision like a photograph, developing in slow motion. The valley stretched below her in shades of green and black, a narrow cleft between 2 ridgelines that rose like walls on either side. Through her targeting pod, she could see the heat signatures of Rodriguez's team, 7 bright spots clustered behind a low stone wall that had probably been built by Alexander the Great's engineers 2 millennia ago. Control, Ghost. I have visual on Neptune 6, counting 7 souls, defensive positions along grid 41 RPQ 874-632, also showing multiple heat signatures advancing from the north, east, and south. Estimate 30+ enemy combatants with heavy weapons. Copy, Ghost. Air Force assets are still 23 minutes out. Continue reconnaissance. 23 minutes. Ghost did the math in her head, factoring in the enemy's rate of advance and the SEAL's limited ammunition. Rodriguez's team would be overrun in 15 minutes, maybe less. She could see muzzle flashes winking like fireflies in the darkness as Taliban fighters crept closer through the rocks and scrub brush. The Harrier's engines whispered as she throttled back, entering a hover at 8,000 feet above the valley floor. The aircraft hung in the night sky like a mechanical angel, its thrust-vectoring nozzles automatically adjusting to maintain position, despite the mountain winds that tried to push her off station. Ghost, Neptune 6, we're running low on ammunition. How long until air support? She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, seeing in her mind the faces of every doubter who'd ever questioned her place in the cockpit. Her father, who'd wanted her to become a doctor. Her squadron commander, who'd suggested she might be happier flying cargo planes. The Pentagon brass who'd made it clear that her primary job was to smile for cameras and prove the military's commitment to diversity. Neptune 6 Ghost, air support is inbound, stay frosty. Rodriguez's voice came back strained but professional. Copy that, Ghost. We'll try to keep the welcome mat out. Ghost studied her weapons systems display, each icon glowing amber in the red-lit cockpit. The Maverick missiles were designed for high-value targets, armored vehicles, bunkers, command posts. Overkill for infantry, but in a pinch, they could clear a hillside of human beings with surgical precision. The problem was authorization. Every trigger pull would be analyzed by lawyers, politicians, and Monday morning quarterbacks who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. She switched to a discrete frequency, one she'd memorized during her intelligence briefings. Overlord, Ghost requesting immediate clearance to engage multiple enemy positions threatening friendly forces. The response came back in the clipped tones of someone reading from a checklist. Ghost, Overlord, negative on weapons release. You are not authorized to engage without positive identification of high-value targets. Through her targeting system, she watched as Taliban fighters maneuvered closer to the SEAL position. These weren't high-value targets. They were foot soldiers, probably farmers' sons from villages that had been fighting foreigners since before America was a country. But they were about to kill 7 of the finest warriors America had ever produced. Overlord Ghost, I have clear line of sight to enemy positions. Neptune 6 is in immediate danger. Ghost Overlord, maintain reconnaissance posture. Air Force assets will handle engagement. Ghost felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd spent her entire career following orders, coloring inside the lines, proving that women could be trusted with the same responsibilities as their male counterparts. But sometimes, she thought as she watched more muzzle flashes erupt around the SEAL position, following orders meant watching good people die. She pushed the Harrier into a gentle dive, descending toward the valley like a bird of prey. The altimeter unwound, 7,000 feet, 6,000, 5,000. Close enough now to see individual enemy fighters through her thermal imaging system, close enough to put rounds exactly where they needed to go. The radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice, calmer now than any man had a right to be. Any station, this is Neptune 6. We are about to be overrun. If anyone's listening, tell our families we love them. Ghost's finger moved to the weapon release button. The Harrier shuddered as Ghost fired her first Maverick missile, the AGM-65 streaking away from the aircraft's starboard pylon like a comet in reverse. She targeted a machine gun position on the northern ridgeline, where muzzle flashes had been winking steadily for the past 5 minutes. The missile's infrared seeker locked onto the heat signature of the weapon's barrel and rode the beam straight to target. The explosion lit up the valley like a brief sunrise, casting harsh shadows across the rocky terrain. When the smoke cleared, the machine gun position was gone, replaced by a crater that would still be visible from orbit decades later. Ghost Overlord, you are not authorized to engage. Cease fire immediately. She switched off that frequency and selected another Maverick, this time targeting a group of fighters who'd been advancing on the SEAL position from the east. The second missile hit with similar results, turning a small depression filled with Taliban fighters into a smoking monument to American engineering. Neptune 6 Ghost, how's your situation now? Rodriguez's voice came back with something that might have been laughter. Ghost, Neptune 6, I don't know who you are, but I owe you a beer. Enemy pressure is significantly reduced. Ghost banked the Harrier hard to the left, lining up for a strafing run on the southern approach where she could see more heat signatures moving through the rocks. The GAU-12 cannon was a beautiful weapon, a 5-barreled rotary cannon that fired 25 rounds at 3,600 rounds per minute. Each projectile was the size of a beer bottle and packed with enough explosive to turn a man into constituent atoms. She rolled inverted and pulled the trigger. The cannon rounds walked across the hillside like the footsteps of an angry god, each impact throwing up geysers of rock and earth. Through her targeting pod, she watched enemy fighters scatter like insects, some running for better cover, others simply ceasing to exist. The Harrier bucked slightly from the cannon's recoil, but Ghost's hand stayed steady on the controls, years of training and natural skill combining to keep her exactly on target. Her radio headset exploded with voices, a cacophony of controllers, commanding officers, and rear-echelon personnel who were just now realizing that a junior Marine pilot had gone completely off the reservation. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the tactical picture developing below. The enemy attack was collapsing, fighters retreating into the maze of caves and valleys that honeycombed the Hindu Kush. Ghost, this is Colonel Briggs, VMA 542 commanding officer. Return to base immediately. You are ordered to RTB at once. She recognized the voice of her squadron commander, a man who'd made it clear that her presence in his unit was more political necessity than tactical asset. Ghost glanced at her fuel gauge, enough for maybe 30 more minutes of loiter time before she'd have to head back to the carrier. Neptune 6, Ghost, what's your status? Ghost, Neptune 6, all souls accounted for. Enemy has withdrawn. I say again, enemy has withdrawn. There was a pause, then Rodriguez's voice came back softer. Ghost, I don't know what your real name is, but you just saved 7 lives tonight. That means something. Ghost felt tears she hadn't realized were there streaked down her cheeks inside her helmet. For 3 years, she'd been trying to prove she belonged in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft. Tonight, for the first time, she felt like she actually did. Below, she could see the first hints of dawn creeping across the eastern peaks, turning the mountains from black to deep purple. The SEAL team was already moving, extracting from their compromised position toward a landing zone where helicopters would pick them up before full daylight exposed them to enemy observation. She thought about the Taliban fighters she'd killed tonight, young men with their own families, their own reasons for fighting. War was never clean, never simple, no matter what the politicians and generals claimed. But sometimes, she reflected as she turned the Harrier toward home, you had to choose between bad and worse. Tonight, she'd chosen to save 7 American lives at the cost of maybe 30 enemy ones. The math was ugly, but it was honest. The flight back to the USS Wasp gave Ghost too much time to think. The Harrier cruised through pre-dawn darkness at 25,000 feet, autopilot engaged, while she stared at the stars and wondered if her career had just ended or finally begun. The radio chatter had died down to occasional position reports and routine communications, but she could feel the weight of official displeasure building like a thunderstorm on the horizon. By the time she entered the carrier's approach pattern, the sun was painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. The Wasp looked impossibly small from altitude, a gray speck floating on an ocean that stretched to the curve of the Earth. Ghost began her vertical descent, using the Harrier's unique capabilities to drop straight down onto the flight deck like an elevator in reverse. The landing was textbook perfect, but she barely noticed. As soon as the wheels touched steel decking, she could see the reception committee waiting, her squadron commander, the air wing commander, and what looked like half the ship's senior staff. None of them looked happy. She shut down the engine and went through her post-flight checklist with mechanical precision, every switch and gauge exactly where it was supposed to be. Sergeant Nakamura appeared at her cockpit, his face carefully neutral as he helped her with the ladder. "How'd she fly, ma'am?" he asked, running his hands along the Harrier's skin with the practiced touch of someone checking for battle damage. "Like she was born for it," Ghost replied, pulling off her helmet. Her hair was matted with sweat, and she could smell cordite and jet fuel on her flight suit. Colonel Briggs was waiting for her at the base of the ladder, his face carved from granite. "Lieutenant Commander Okafor, you will report to my stateroom immediately for debriefing." "Yes, sir," she said, snapping to attention. Around them, the flight deck crew went about their business with studied indifference, but she could feel their eyes on her. Word had already spread through the ship's informal communication network. The female pilot had gone kinetic without authorization, probably ending her career in the process. The walk to the colonel's stateroom felt like a funeral march. Ghost kept her back straight and her eyes forward, even as she passed groups of aircrew who stopped their conversations to stare. Some looked curious, others disapproving. A few, mostly the younger enlisted sailors, looked something like impressed. Briggs's stateroom was spartanly furnished, all regulation furniture and precisely hung photographs of aircraft and official ceremonies. He gestured for her to take a seat while he poured coffee from a thermal carafe that had seen better days. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, sir. I provided close air support to a SEAL team under enemy fire. You engaged targets without authorization. You ignored direct orders from higher authority. You've created an international incident that's going to have repercussions all the way to the Pentagon." He set the coffee cup in front of her with barely controlled force. "The Taliban is claiming we killed 37 civilians, including women and children." Ghost felt her stomach drop. "Sir, I had positive visual identification of enemy combatants engaging friendly forces. There were no civilians in the target area." "According to who? Your targeting pod, your night vision." Briggs leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 53 years. "Zara, I know you meant well. Hell, maybe you even did the right thing. But the right thing and the legal thing aren't always the same." She stared into her coffee cup, seeing her reflection distorted in the black surface. "Sir, 7 SEALs would be dead right now if I hadn't engaged. And that's probably the only thing that's going to save your career." He pulled out a manila folder and dropped it on the desk between them. Rodriguez and his team leader both filed after-action reports. "They're calling you a hero. Says you appeared out of nowhere and saved their lives when no one else would." Ghost looked up surprised. "Sir, the Taliban fighters you killed, turns out they were carrying Syrian passports. Foreign fighters, probably Al-Qaeda affiliated. The kind of high-value targets that Washington loves to eliminate." Briggs almost smiled. "Sometimes, Lieutenant Commander, it's better to be lucky than good." Outside the porthole, she could see the sun climbing higher above the horizon, painting the carrier's wake in shades of gold and foam. Somewhere in those mountains, 7 American warriors were headed home to their families. It wasn't clean, it wasn't simple, but tonight it was enough. 2 months later, Ghost stood on the pier at Naval Air Station Oceana, watching ground crews load her personal effects into a government sedan. The transfer orders in her pocket were stamped with more official seals than she'd ever seen on a single document. Reassignment to Marine Aircraft Group 14, where she'd be flying the new F-35B Lightning II as part of an experimental vertical landing squadron. The hearing had lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from everyone from Rodriguez's team leader to the Secretary of Defense. The Taliban had eventually retracted their civilian casualty claims when surveillance footage emerged showing their fighters using a village as a staging area, complete with weapons caches hidden in civilian homes. Ghost had been cleared of all charges and commended for her initiative under fire. She still wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "Ghost," the voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, jogging across the tarmac in desert camouflage utilities. Behind him came the rest of Neptune 6, all 7 members of the SEAL team she'd pulled out of that valley in the Hindu Kush. "Chief Rodriguez," she said, coming to attention out of habit. "Ma'am, knock that off." Rodriguez grinned and stuck out his hand. "We're not here for anything official. We just wanted to say thanks before you shipped out." She shook hands with each of them, nodding the calloused palms and steady grips of men who'd made violence their profession. They looked different in garrison utilities, younger somehow, less like the mythical warriors of Hollywood movies, and more like the sons and husbands they actually were. "Chief, you would have made it out of there with or without me," she said. "SEALs don't quit." "Maybe," Rodriguez replied, "but we might have made it out in body bags instead of on our own 2 feet." He reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. "We wanted you to have this." Ghost unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small metal pin, a golden trident backed by silver wings, the insignia of a naval aviator who'd earned the respect of naval special warfare. "It's not official," Rodriguez said quietly, "but it's real. You're one of us now, Ghost. Anytime, anywhere, if you need anything, you call." She felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. These men had seen more combat than most people could imagine, had trained for scenarios that would give ordinary citizens nightmares. Their respect meant more than any medal or commendation that Washington could bestow. "Thank you," she said, pinning the trident to her uniform. "All of you." As they walked away, she heard one of the younger SEALs ask Rodriguez something she couldn't quite make out, but his response carried clearly across the tarmac. "That's Ghost, kid. When the chips are down and the shit hits the fan, she's exactly who you want watching your six." Ghost climbed into the sedan and settled back for the drive to her new assignment. Through the window, she could see FA-18 Hornets launching from the parallel runway, their afterburners painting brief stars against the afternoon sky. Each pilot in those cockpits had their own story, their own battles to fight, their own chances to prove what they were made of. She thought about the Taliban fighters she'd killed, the families they'd left behind, the villages that would remember her visit for generations to come. War was still ugly, still complicated, still fought by young people who deserved better from the world they'd inherited. But sometimes, late at night over the Hindu Kush, good people needed someone to appear out of the darkness and remind the world that Americans don't abandon their own. Ghost smiled as the sedan pulled away from the pier. She had a new aircraft to learn, new missions to fly, new chances to prove that some traditions were worth preserving no matter how much the world changed around them. The reputation that followed Ghost to her new squadron was a complicated thing, equal parts legend and liability. The story of the Marine pilot who'd saved 7 SEALs had been classified, sanitized, and spun through so many official channels that the truth had become flexible. Some versions painted her as a reckless cowboy who'd gotten lucky. Others portrayed her as a tactical genius who'd single-handedly changed the course of a firefight through superior airmanship and split-second decision-making. Major Jackson Hammer Powell, commanding officer of Marine Fighting Squadron 121, had heard all the stories by the time Ghost reported for duty at Marine Corps Air Station Yuma. What he saw walking into his office was a compact woman in her late 20s, with dark skin, intelligent eyes, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from surviving situations where lesser pilots would have folded. "Lieutenant Commander Akaffer reporting for duty, sir," she said, rendering a perfect salute. Powell returned the salute and gestured for her to take a seat. His office was decorated with photographs of every aircraft he'd ever flown: F-4 Phantoms from his early days, FA-18 Hornets from his squadron command tour, and now the sleek lines of the F-35B Lightning II that represented the future of marine aviation. "I'll get straight to the point, Ghost," he said, using her call sign without preamble. "I've got 18 pilots in this squadron, and 17 of them think they know everything there is to know about close air support because they've read Tom Clancy novels and watched Top Gun. You're here because you've actually done it for real, and I need someone who can teach these kids the difference between Hollywood and reality." She studied his face, looking for signs of the skepticism she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, she found something that might have been respect. "Sir, I appreciate your confidence, but..." "But nothing," Powell leaned forward, his expression serious. The Marine Corps is changing, Ghost. The old ways of doing business aren't going to cut it in the next war. We need pilots who can think outside the box, who can adapt to fluid situations, who can make the hard calls when the brass isn't looking over their shoulders. He paused. Rodriguez and his team leader both submitted fitness reports on your performance. They're recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Ghost felt her eyebrows rise. The DFC was one of the highest decorations available to aviators, typically reserved for actions that went well beyond the call of duty. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, Powell said quietly. You were doing what you thought was right, even when it meant risking your career. That's exactly the kind of thinking I want in my pilots. He pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the desk. Your first assignment is to develop new tactics for the F-35B in the close air support role. I want you to figure out how we can use this aircraft's unique capabilities to provide better support to troops on the ground. Ghost opened the folder, revealing technical specifications and performance data for the Lightning II. The F-35B was a marvel of modern engineering, a stealth fighter that could take off and land vertically like her old Harrier, but with sensors and computing power that made it more like a flying computer than a traditional aircraft. The Lightning has capabilities we're only beginning to understand, Powell continued. Its sensor fusion system can track dozens of targets simultaneously, share data with ground forces in real time, and coordinate strikes with other aircraft across the battlefield. But all of that technology is useless if we don't have pilots who know how to employ it effectively. She flipped through the pages, absorbing technical details and performance parameters. The F-35B could carry twice the ordnance load of her old Harrier while maintaining stealth characteristics that would make it nearly invisible to enemy radar. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of aircraft that could have made her mission over the Hindu Kush even more effective. When do I start, sir? Powell smiled, and for the first time since she'd entered his office, he looked like the kind of commander who genuinely cared about his people. You start tomorrow. There's an F-35B on the flight line with your name on it, and a team of test pilots who are eager to see what the famous Ghost can do with a real fighter. As she walked across the flight line toward her new aircraft, Ghost felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about flying. The F-35B sat under the desert sun like a predatory bird, its angular surfaces designed to scatter radar waves, and its internal weapons bays hiding enough firepower to level city blocks. She climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit, marveling at the advanced displays and intuitive controls. This wasn't just an aircraft. It was a weapons system designed for the wars of the future, flown by pilots who understood that the line between victory and defeat often came down to split-second decisions made by individuals who'd never see their names in history books. Ghost powered up the Lightning systems and felt the aircraft come alive around her. Tomorrow, she'd begin the process of learning how to fight in this new machine. But tonight, as she ran through pre-flight checks under the Arizona stars, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the next time American warriors found themselves surrounded and outnumbered, they'd have something more than luck and courage on their side. They'd have Ghost, and everything she'd learned about the thin line between following orders and doing what was right. 6 months into her assignment at Yuma, Ghost had transformed from student to instructor. The F-35B Lightning II had become an extension of her will, its advanced systems responding to her touch with an intimacy that bordered on the supernatural. More importantly, she'd begun to understand how the aircraft's unique capabilities could revolutionize close air support in ways that traditional fighters simply couldn't match. The breakthrough came during a training exercise designed to simulate urban warfare in a Middle Eastern setting. Ghost was flying as opposing force, tasked with providing air support to a simulated enemy ground unit, while a team of Marine infantry practiced calling in strikes against her position. It should have been a routine exercise, the kind of training scenario she'd flown dozens of times before. Instead, it became a demonstration of how warfare itself was evolving. Reaper 1-1, this is Chaos 6, came the voice of Captain Marcus Dagger Chen, the forward air controller embedded with the ground unit. We have eyes on enemy aircraft. Grid 34 SMB 867-421. Request immediate air support. Ghost smiled inside her helmet. Chen was good, one of the best FACs in the Marine Corps, but he was thinking in terms of conventional tactics. He expected her to either run away or engage his simulated surface-to-air missiles in a traditional air-to-air engagement. Instead, she did something that no enemy pilot would ever think to do. She turned off her transponder, activated the F-35 stealth mode, and simply vanished from his radar screen. Chaos 6, Reaper 1-1, came the confused response from the Hawkeye early warning aircraft controlling the exercise. We've lost radar contact with the opposing force aircraft. Last known position Grid 34 SMB 87420. Ghost was actually 3 miles away, hovering at 5,000 feet directly above Chen's position, invisible to both radar and visual observation. The F-35's advanced sensor suite painted a complete tactical picture of the battlefield below. Every vehicle, every individual Marine, every weapon position marked and cataloged in real time. She selected her targeting pod and began designating targets, not with weapons but with her laser rangefinder. Each time the invisible laser touched a Marine position, the exercise computers registered a simulated missile strike. In the space of 30 seconds, she had theoretically eliminated an entire reinforced platoon without ever being detected. Index, 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 came Major Powell's voice over the radio, calling a halt to the exercise. All units returned to base for debrief. The debrief session in the squadron-ready room was unlike anything Ghost had experienced in her career. Instead of the usual post-flight analysis of what went right and what went wrong, she found herself facing a room full of pilots, ground controllers, and infantry officers who looked like they'd seen the future of warfare and weren't sure they liked what they'd witnessed. Ghost, Powell began, consulting his notes, walk us through your decision-making process during that engagement. She stood and moved to the large tactical display at the front of the room, using a laser pointer to trace her flight path during the exercise. The key insight is that the F-35 stealth capabilities don't just make us invisible to enemy radar. They make us invisible to friendly radar as well. That creates tactical opportunities that simply didn't exist with previous generation aircraft. Captain Chen raised his hand. Ma'am, what you did out there was impressive, but it was also kind of terrifying. If you can do that to us during training, what happens when the other guys figure out the same tactics? It was a good question, and one that Ghost had been wrestling with for months. The F-35 program was the largest military procurement in history, with versions of the aircraft being sold to allies around the world. Eventually, the tactics she was developing would be countered by adversaries who'd studied American techniques and developed countermeasures. The answer, she said slowly, is that we have to stay ahead of the curve. We have to think like the enemy thinks, anticipate their responses, and develop new tactics before they even know they need them. She clicked to the next slide, showing a combat scenario over urban terrain. The Lightning doesn't just carry weapons, it carries information. Its sensors can penetrate weather, darkness, and electronic countermeasures to provide real-time intelligence to ground forces. We can see through walls, track individual targets across miles of terrain, and coordinate strikes with surgical precision. The room was quiet now, the implications sinking in. This wasn't just about better close air support. It was about redefining the relationship between air and ground forces, creating a level of integration that would make traditional military tactics obsolete. Major Powell stood and moved to the front of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, What Ghost has demonstrated today is going to be classified at the highest levels. The tactics and techniques we're developing here will give American forces a decisive advantage in the next conflict, but only if we can keep them secret until we're ready to deploy them operationally. Ghost felt a familiar weight settling on her shoulders, the responsibility that came with being at the cutting edge of military innovation. She thought about Rodriguez and his SEAL team, about the Taliban fighters in the Hindu Kush, about all the battles yet to be fought by warriors who would never know her name. The future of warfare was being written in the skis over Arizona, one training flight at a time. The call came at 200 on a Tuesday in March, jolting Ghost from dreams of mountain valleys and burning aircraft. Major Powell's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the tension underneath. "Ghost, we need you in the briefing room in 15 minutes. Full flight gear, classified materials only." She was dressed and moving within 5 minutes, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar routine of preparing for a mission she knew nothing about. The corridors of the squadron building were empty, except for a few duty personnel, their faces carefully neutral as she passed. The briefing room was packed with people she'd never seen before, men and women in civilian clothes, with the kind of pale complexion that came from spending too much time in windowless rooms. Their presence could only mean one thing: this mission.